women's ministry or playing the bass or high school group. So just, we want to hear their stories.
Thank you. I have a clicker, we've got some pictures, and yeah, we'll just kind of go from the beginning and work our way through. We've been married for almost 15 years, and we've been at Cornerstone for 100% of that time. So yeah, kind of an interesting, this is the first place that we ever showed up as newlyweds, fresh back from a honeymoon, and we've never left. So it's kind of neat. So just kind of start, I think what we're going to do is we're going to talk about ourselves kind of individually, and I'll go way back, and then she gets to talk about herself some, and then we'll kind of talk about us together. So I am from the west side of Oregon. I grew up mostly out in Gales Creek, if you know where that is. Yeah. So drive to the beach, when you get to Forest Grove, just kind of keep going, and out there in the hills, that's where I'm from. So my parents had some property, some acreage out there, so growing up was pretty much all motorcycles and deer rifles and hunting and fishing and, you know, climbing trees and falling out of trees and that kind of thing. So yeah, there's a few pictures there. My parents were really into motorcycling and things like that, and that was ingrained into me at a very young age. So big trucks and engines and cars and all that fun stuff, that was just what we did. And deer hunting, you can see I did that pretty much every single year growing up. My grandparents are over here on the right-hand side with those are my brother and sister. I do have a brother and a sister. They still kind of are around. My grandparents, my dad was actually adopted. So those are my adopted grandparents. We didn't meet my biological grandparents until much later. We met my biological grandmother when I was a senior in high school, and she is a wonderful dear lady, and my parents moved out to LeGrand to go be near her just a year or two ago. So she's great. And then we actually met my biological grandpa, not even, was it last summer?
Spring break.
Spring break, there you go. So not that long ago. And that was really pretty neat to be able to, you know, see where my parents are from. But those two people there, Ken and Jay Anderson, those are my grandparents that I knew my whole life. We did everything with them. So we went to the same church that they did. I grew up in one church. It was the same church that my dad grew up in. So my dad has been a member of that church for 60, however old he is now. So same exact church. It's a little Baptist church in downtown Hillsboro. That was the only church that I ever knew until I got into college. And that was kind of a big deal. They were very influential in my life. We spent every Sunday at their house. So the way our church worked, I don't know, this is kind of a 80s, 90s maybe thing, I don't know, for Baptist churches. You'd go to church in the morning. You had to be there for Sunday school at 8 o'clock in the morning, and if you weren't there, it was right. And then the service would run until it was over. People would go home and get lunch really quick, and then you came right back for evening service, and if you weren't there for evening service, right, so we were there all the time. Well, we lived too far away from the church to go all the way home, so we would just hang out at Grandma and Grandpa's. So yeah, very, very influential, and I love them very dearly. Those are my parents down here at the bottom, Dave and Debbie, and they are wonderful people. I love them dearly. My mom is from way back east, so she's from Mississippi, Tennessee, kind of grew up down there, and then my dad is definitely not. He's from up here, and yeah, they're great. You know, it was interesting, kind of being in the same church and kind of growing up with the same people all the time. I didn't really have a good idea of what a church could be, really, until I went to college and started looking around, because all I know is what I know, right? And if all you know is the little Baptist church that you grew up in, well, that's what all churches look like, right? And then when we got to college and you start going to other churches, you're like, well, I don't know if I like that. Where's the potluck? They don't do potlucks? What? You know, and so we shopped around a little bit at some different churches, and kind of once I met Stephanie, we ended up kind of trying to figure out where we were in life and in church, and that's kind of a story we'll get to here in a little bit. But yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Do you want to share how you came to know Jesus.
Oh, that's probably a good idea. So, yeah, I grew up in the church, like I said, and so I kind of had always been around that kind of thing. I prayed the prayer when I was like maybe 6 years old or so. Mom had taken me to a Salty the Singing Songbook thing at the convention center, and so there's all sorts of stuff, and it was pretty cool. We got to sing in the choir. It was really great. You know, in the back behind everybody's wearing the same colored shirts and just sing really loud. So anyway, we prayed the prayer. For me, that was kind of cool. I was a little kid though, and so I don't know, maybe some of you have had that experience when you are in the church and you're just part of it, it's part of your culture. It's not really a super real thing to you until you go off and experience something else. And so I never really got in any trouble. As a teenager, I got to push the boundaries a lot, but I never really crossed over any major lines or anything until I went to college. And then it was like, oh geez, you're on a crossroads. You can either choose to stay where mom and dad kind of had brought you up and you knew what the right thing to do was, or you could go off the rails and you can get in some really big trouble very quickly. And so I had to make a decision when I was in college. Thankfully I chose the way I did. But that was a little bit of a growth thing, because when I left for college, which actually is just in between these two pictures that are up here on the right hand side. Up there I was about 16, I think, and that top picture, and down here I was 19, 20 maybe. Oh, okay, so older. All right, whatever. Anyway, in between there, when I first went off to college, I went to Oregon State for my first year, and it was a little bit of a train wreck because mom and dad were kind of the boundaries, right? And we lived way out, and so you're not able to like just, I'm gonna pack up and go leave and go do something else whenever I want to. So I played a ton of ultimate frisbee and stuff like that, and video games, not a lot of school. I didn't know anybody when I went to Oregon State. You had to go to college, and so I just was like, oh, I guess you gotta go. So I went to Oregon State and didn't know a single person. Nobody went to church, and so I'm not going to church either, right? Because I'm not gonna go, by myself. That just wasn't gonna happen. Get out of bed early. That ended up pretty bad, right? It was a disaster. I would say that was probably one of the worst years of my entire life. When I came home, it was horrible. I had gained a bunch of weight. My mom actually laughed at me when I got out of the car. If she ever watches this video, may not remember that, but that was definitely true. I had just kind of made a mess of stuff and was like, holy smokes, what am I gonna do? I actually applied for Corbin College, which at the time was Western Baptist University, and they should never have accepted me. Seriously, I was transferring in with exactly 0 credits.
And this was back when colleges really cared who
They
they let
actually
in.
cared about who they let in, right? And so 0 credits, and they put me on academic probation immediately, and it was like, all right, buddy, you're flunking out of here in just a little bit, but it was nice knowing you. And I actually was able to kind of turn things around pretty significantly in a very big way. But it was a definite growth. There's a lot to go through there, where you are kind of having to like realize, oh man, that was a mess. And what do I do? I know what not to do, right? And yeah, so that was kind of where I started off when I met Stephanie. Again, talk about, she probably should never have given me the time of day, and yet she did for some reason. I was irritating, right? That was
You can leave that for the...
I'll let her talk about
Yeah.
it. So, anyway. Oh, yeah, you can hold that.
So Dan and I laughed as we were preparing for this because I have notes and Dan does not have notes, and I was like, what questions do they want us to answer? And he's like, we approach this very differently, don't we? I don't think mine will be quite as detailed as yours. That's good. So that's me. I grew up outside Sandy, so kind of opposite end of where Dan grew up. My parents are Jim and Kathy Hallman. A lot of you know my dad, Jim, has been attending Cornerstone the last few years, which is great. So I was the second child born to my parents. I have an older sister who's 6 years older, and that's her in the upper picture. Her name is Trisha, and she was born with a rare and serious chromosomal disorder, so she was very disabled. So my parents waited 6 years to have another child. It was pretty hard, very hard on them. I'm very grateful they stayed together. A lot of you know that having children with disabilities is hard on marriages, so it wasn't easy for them. There was, I think, a lot of difficulty through that, but I'm glad they stayed together and had me.
Me too.
Yeah. My childhood was very quiet. I was into horses. I started taking riding lessons when I was about 10. My parents did buy me my own horse named Buddy when I was 12. I don't know how they did that now. Horses are so expensive. It was a big sacrifice, but very kind of them to do that. So I enjoyed riding horses. Just had a quiet childhood. I grew up as an only child at home. My parents started homeschooling me once I was in 5th grade. And so, yeah, there's not a whole lot more to share other than, so my mom had become a believer when she was a teenager. I don't think Dad would call himself a believer until much later in life. But my mom would send me to VBS. So I don't think we started consistently going to church until I was older, but when I was 8, my mom sent me to what was then Orient Baptist, and I went to their VBS, and I don't have the best memory from my childhood, but I just very clearly remember that the teacher asked, do you know you're going to heaven? Do you know Jesus? And I was like, oh, I want that so much. And so just have never really doubted my relationship with the Lord. Very grateful for that. And then when I was about 10, we started consistently going to Good Shepherd. And so I would say that was kind of my home church growing up until I went to Corbin. And I don't know exactly what all the thought process was in me going to Corbin other than it was close. It was nice and close. It was pretty solid doctrinally. And my parents felt good about that choice. I'm glad it worked out.
Me too. So that is a little bit of our college and then up into getting married experience there. So up here on the top left, that was our very first date that we ever went on. The school had winter formal or chivalry, they called it a chivalry dinner. Very nice.
Basically, they're like snowball.
Snowball. So it's like October or something, October, November, something like that in that picture. It was kind of funny when I had gotten to school, it was like, girls are bad, they're icky, we don't want, because every girl I had ever even looked at had gotten me into trouble or in some way or another, so it was like, no. And then over the course of the next couple of months, I just kept running into Stephanie everywhere I went, right? She was sitting next to me in class and I'd irritate her. She would...
You were in front of me.
Or whatever, right? Nearby.
You would turn around and make comments, if you can imagine.
Yeah. It's a miracle I didn't get thrown out of class. I'm just going to say that. We would, they had at the school, they had their version of a sorority and of a, that kind of thing. But they were all the Christian versions. So I just went and said, hey, my roommate was signing up for one, so I'll just go and join. And then she signed up for the sister thing, so we go on these retreats and stuff, and it's like, oh, there she is. And then we would go to the lunchroom, and oh, there she is. Oh, we go to class, oh, you're in this one too. And so it just kind of ended up being where we kept bumping into each other, and I have no idea why she would ever even give me the time of day, because I was pretty aggravating, I think. If I was to meet me now as an 18 or 19-year-old guy, I'd be like, that guy needs to grow up big time.
I think a lot of the loudness was like bravado. But when I got to talk to him, I was like, oh, there's a very sensitive, thoughtful person behind the loud.
And a lot of that, I think, was rooted in the past, right? So my parents had moved me around in school a lot, so I did not go to the same school very consistently at all. I went to like 5 different schools before I graduated high school. My parents didn't move houses, but once. But I went to a private school, and I went to that school, and I went to, and they kind of shifted me around a little bit. So you don't make a whole lot of long-term friends. I'm very envious of people that have been at the same school system for their entire childhood, and they have all these friends that they get for years. Well, I don't really have a whole lot of that. And so a lot of that was either you're going to have to be very loud and bold and out front, even though it's only about that deep, if you ever want anybody to even get to know you at all. So there was a lot of that. I was still wearing wallet chains and stuff like this just because it's cool, and it's not.
We also realize how young we were now. Like, at the time, as a freshman, you feel really grown up. But now I'm like, I was barely 18 and you were 19, and now we have a 13-year-old, so I'm like, oh, we were really, really young.
Kids in the high school youth group, when they like each other, you're like, you better be careful, because you're 18 and she's 7, you guys could easily, right, this is, anyway, so at the time it didn't feel that way, right? It felt like, oh, we're something right now. And I look at that picture, I'm like, so this is our engagement photo down here at the bottom when we got engaged. We dated for all 4 years of college, and my best friend from high school, which is the reason why I was at Corbin in the first place, he got married halfway through high school, or college, I should say. And he was like, "What are you doing? Why aren't you getting married yet?" I was like, "Oh, you gotta have money, you gotta have a job, you gotta have all this stuff." Anyway, so yeah, we dated the whole time. That was good. Specifically with regards to church-related stuff, I had said we kind of shopped around a little bit for churches. We went to a few different ones, and then we settled on, finally, I think the last couple of years of college, we had settled on what used to be kind of a very big church in the area that had a split recently. And we were the only 2 college-age people in a college town. This town's got multiple colleges in this town, and there are only 2 college-age people in the whole church. We went there for 2 years, and I still don't think we ever talked to a single person other than the pastor. Nobody knew us, but we just went because you got to pick a church, and we like the pastor, and the music's okay, so this is where we're going to be.
I think it primed us to want community, though, because it was good, it was great teaching, but that's just a piece of church. So.
Right, and so you're sitting there kind of going, well, from my perspective, Baptist church, where you're either in the crowd or you're not going to come at all. To be in here, where it's like, oh, you can just kind of be there in the back, or on the side. We sat like way over on one side, and nobody talked to you. And it's like, well, I guess church this is what it is. So when we got married immediately after graduating. I think it was like 2 weeks after we graduated. We got married, we went on our honeymoon down in Palm Springs. That was pretty fun, and then we came home, and life happens very fast. Barry used to joke that we went from being newlyweds to middle-aged, in a week, right? Because, but Stephanie wanted to share about that.
Yeah, I guess before we get to the rest of our story, one of my college summer jobs was working for, some of you know Ken and Linda Holmstrom. They owned a window business. And while I was working there, I met Amy Campbell, and she's Kathy Norquist's daughter. Some of you know their family, and so she had told her mom about me, and their EPM was looking, Eternal Perspective Ministries was looking for someone to do some various projects, and so they took a chance on a 19-year-old college student, and I'm so grateful. And it just would be hard to talk about our lives without talking about the influence that Randy Alcorn and also Kathy Norquist, who was his assistant for years, have had. And there's Bonnie. She probably doesn't want to be called out, but there's Bonnie up there in that staff picture.
Thanks a lot.
Shauna's up there too. Yeah, just Randy's books, Randy's writings. I never stopped working for them, which is funny. It's been such a great, flexible job over the years, being a mom, going through just some really hard life changes, but I just didn't want to, I couldn't share our life story without saying that they've had a profound impact on us.
Yeah, they, that ministry, the people there have been responsible, I think, for growing us in enormous ways, and Stephanie is still there, which to me is super cool, because my work experience has been kind of like the ball in a pinball machine where you just get slapped around a little bit, and it's like, I guess I'm going over here now. And so I've never really been in a whole lot of places for too long. So been all over the place. My resume is about a mile long if you ever typed it all up. Hers is awesome, right? And they've been such wonderful people to have in life. I mean, I remember a time we saved up to go on a date. We did not have a lot of money, and so we saved a whole bunch of money that we didn't really have to go to the, what was that place? The Truffle Hunter, back when it was still open. And we got there and we were like, okay, we're just gonna splurge. We never do this. So we got drinks, like we actually got a Coca-Cola. We never do that. We got, we ordered the big meal. Let's get an appetizer and dessert, yay! And then Randy Alcorn was sitting over there, and he saw us there, and on the way out, he paid our bill. I just said, hey, that table over there, we got it covered. So we walked over there to pay, and they're like, oh, he already paid for you guys. I'm like, but he's just that kind of guy, and it was really, really good, and it's really been very beneficial for us over the years. So this is kind of what I meant by life happening fast. Evelyn is sitting over there. She doesn't want to be called that either, but she is 13 years old. We had been married for a grand total of 6 months when we found out we were going to be having a baby, and it was kind of like, I better get a job, So you go from being very young to being very responsible for things all at once. And it doesn't feel that way. It kind of is a little bit more like throwing an anchor out of a car that's moving down the highway at 65 miles an hour. It's a little bit what that felt like. The things that I used to think were really good, I used to love motocross, like watching the races and X Games and jumping dirt bikes and stuff. And that went from being like, that's really awesome, to like 3 months later going, those boys are going to kill themselves. And how irresponsible. That, I think, was also pretty instrumental in shaping our family. When you're a young couple that now all of a sudden has to be responsible for somebody other than just you, it's a pretty big life change. And for some of us, that didn't have a whole lot to kind of fall back on as far as like what should you do as a parent, it was a lot of growth.
It was kind of. We were so happy and glad to have Evelyn, but it was a shock to the system. It just wasn't. It was a surprise. So we always tell her, God planned you. We're not ashamed of that. That's a wonderful thing to be planned by the Lord. But it was the beginning of seeing God's sovereignty and our story. You want to go to the next?
Sure. And for the record, Evelyn's pretty awesome.
She is awesome. So when Evelyn was about 7 months old, I was diagnosed with stage 2B Hodgkin's lymphoma. And like looking back at pictures now, it was pretty obvious something was really wrong, but I had just had my first baby. I didn't really know what is recovery supposed to be like from having a baby, but it was actually Kathy Norquist that finally said, you have to go to the doctor, you have to find out what's wrong. So they did an x-ray and found that I had a mass between my lungs and the lymphatic tissue. It was like having the wind knocked out of us. You just don't expect to hear the word cancer at age 23, especially when you have a baby. But God was so good to us. So the piece of our story is that Dan graduated and didn't really have a clear career plan. He didn't know what he wanted to do with life. And so we were just kind of struggling financially. And about the time Evelyn, she was probably about 2 or 3 months old when you started going back to George Fox for your master's in teaching. You decided, I'm going to teach. So we had Evelyn, he went back to school, and then I was diagnosed with cancer. And we weren't making a ton, but that actually, God took such good care of us. OHSU paid 100% of my treatment. We didn't pay a penny for all my treatment. It's just amazing. And the type of cancer I had was very treatable. It was the most treatable subset. So 6 months of chemo, 6 weeks of radiation, and I'm really thankful to say I've never had any recurrence or problems with it. But we were like, wow, like if we hadn't have had Evelyn when we did, we wouldn't have entertained having kids for many years. So at the time they were like, you might not be able to have more children, and we just thought, well, if this is the only child God gives us, like we are thankful, we are glad. But she's not.
Happy and healthy. And actually, there's more to that story. So at the time, I was, she mentioned when I graduated, I never really had great career aspirations. What do you want to do in life? Pay the bills. Like that's about all I ever right. So I was working at Fred Meyer arresting shoplifters. That was my job. $11 an hour to get punched in the face by gangbangers and things out in the parking lot out in North.
This was back when they actually tried to stop people from shopping.
You actually used to care about people stealing stuff. So that was my job. And then we had all this stuff happen, and then the baby, and so now I've got a new baby, and I'm getting paid to get beat up. And it's just not much, it's not a long-term solution. Went back to college because I knew I needed to do something better, and I had been volunteering at the youth group, and a bunch of kids had been asking for homework help, and so I was just like, oh, here's how this works, and here's how that. And they were like, oh, how come you don't teach this stuff? Because I would way rather take this from you than from the teacher I have. So, well, I might as well just try for this master's degree program. Been out of school for a few years. Again, they probably shouldn't really be looking at, because I haven't been trying to go that direction at all. But I applied and got in, and within a few months of getting in, I actually got fired from my shoplifting job. I think one of the things that God knows about me is that I have a tendency to kind of settle, where I am like, hey, this stinks, it's not very good, but it's what I got, and so that's what I'm gonna hang on to. And I think God has given me the boot, just, you're gonna go make something else. And so the reasons why I got fired from that job were completely ridiculous. They accused me of stealing a bite-sized candy bar out of a bag of Halloween candy that I threw in the garbage. So when you arrest somebody for stealing something, if it's something that can go back on the shelf, great, they do that. If it's a bag of something that's been ripped open and you can't put that back on the shelf, right? So this lady had stolen a bunch of stuff. We arrested her. She had a bag of Halloween candy, the little pre-packaged mini bites. She ripped it open and ate half of it or whatever, and then the rest of it's going in the garbage. Well, they accused me of eating one of those, and that's stealing from the company, and so therefore they fired me for that, which is like, of all the dumb things. So that was pretty devastating, because now I've got new school that I'm starting. I have a wife that's sick with cancer, I have a brand new baby, and I got no job. Right? So when she's saying that God was very good to us, I have no idea how we made it through that time. We were paying bills, writing checks, and they kept coming out of a bank account that had $27.36 left in it, and they just kind of kept clearing. So, it was really...
God was good, but I mean, we just can't talk about this portion of our life without talking about Cornerstone. I mean, the community that we have here has meant everything to us. So there's Dan with April Fisher. Dan was on staff with April. A lot of you remember April. She was very influential in our lives. I was baptized by Barry. That was actually right after my chemo treatments. Evelyn was baptized by Dan a few years ago at a Cornerstone retreat, and then that's just another picture of Evelyn with some of her friends. Cornerstone helped us with bills during that time. People have brought meals. I don't know how people do it without the body of Christ. I really, really don't know.
Yeah, we've talked about that before, where our neighbors, we've got neighbors and people that we know that they don't go to church. And when they get like even the slightest little bit of bad news, it's completely devastating to them. And I kind of understand why. Like, you have nothing, like there's no support, there's no structure, there's no anything in place. For us, I mean, we had bad news, and we've had more than our share, I think. The church body has been instrumental in completely carrying us along. I mean, when we first started coming to Cornerstone, something was different, right? When we walked in the door, we were here for exactly one church service, and they had the pizza thing going on afterwards, and Barry's sending me home with all his pizza. I met I don't even know, 30 people. I have no idea how many people. The first day we were there, it was like, hey, you guys are new. Here's some people that are your age. Hey, they have a Bible study. You might want to get plugged into that Bible study. Hey, take some pizza, right? And I was walking away going, what is this?
They liked your wife.
That probably is true. Yeah, I don't doubt that for a second. It was so different. Now I am at the point where I fully 100%, 1,000% am of the opinion that a new person in the church, I'm going to whatever I have to do to get over there and say hi and welcome them, just because I feel like that you can have, the church that we were going to had a great pastor. He did a really good job teaching. They had really good worship. But if you never met anybody at all, long-term longevity, the health of that church, we wouldn't have stayed, right? It would have been completely pointless for us to do that. I think getting people plugged in and making relationships, that right there is, you can deal with church in a box. You can deal with not having a laser light show and the fog machine and all that stuff. And it's going to be really good, and people are going to grow, and it's going to be awesome. And that, to me, is what church now, because of Corner, you guys have actually sort of broken church a little bit for me, because I have a feeling that if I ever had to, for any reason, go anywhere else, I would be really bummed, because I'd be looking around going, keep putting this thing down.
So thankfully, we were able to have another baby. So 5 years after Evelyn was born, we had Sienna. Many of you know Sienna. We're so glad. This was one of God's greatest blessings. It was just felt like such a sign of His faithfulness that we were able to have her.
Yeah, and because we were not sure with chemotherapy, it wipes out a lot of fast reproducing cells, and a lot of those are the ones that you might need later if you ever want to be having babies. So it was not 100% when all that stuff was done. They're like, oh, we don't think anything's hurt here, but you just can't know. So that was pretty cool, and it was also kind of nice to have a kid that we actually planned on. You know that. We love Evelyn dearly, but and then there was this. So a few years after Sienna, was born, we found out we were having another baby, and that Stephanie never really felt super great about the pregnancy, kind of the whole way through, and
I guess I should call this. We kind of call these our desert years. Dan had been working for Portland Christian teaching, and when Sienna was 9 months old, so at the end of that school year in 2015, he lost his job. And it was devastating at the time. And so until the end of 2019, Dan subbed. We never knew what the month's paycheck was going to be. I just look back, I'm amazed how God provided. I don't know how it happened, but like he said, we kept paying bills, God took care of us. So when we found out we were pregnant again, we were just like, Lord, I mean, you think we would have learned from the last few lessons, but it was a strange pregnancy. I was pretty ill with infections the whole time. And then I went in for my 20-week ultrasound and found out that the baby had trisomy 18. It was just so much wrong, and it was just devastating. But again, the church just really wrapped their arms around us. He did pass in utero at 24 weeks, and yeah, it's just so beautiful. Cornerstone, we held a small service at Barry and Vicky's house. The church helped us provide a burial for him, actually right near where the Knowles live at that Sandy Cemetery. It was hard. Anyway, I just was thinking of a quote that Timothy Keller says. He says, I'm going to judge my circumstances by Jesus' love, not Jesus' love by my circumstances. We've had to learn that lesson.
Yeah, I mean, that was probably the most difficult thing I could have imagined, right? You can't really, unless you've been there and you've lost a child, I don't know if you can really quite fully appreciate it. But it was another one of those things where now you've lost your job again, right? Again, for things that were just sort of silly, right? They just decided not to renew my contract.
Again, God's sovereignty at the time. But at the time, it didn't feel like it.
Get out the door, right? It was kind of what that was. But at the time, it definitely did not feel that way. It was like, what are you doing to me, right? And then we're out here with this, and I'm substitute teaching, which was horrible, and I don't really like it very much, and just kind of bouncing around again, getting slapped around like the ball in the pinball machine, going, what is happening? It was pretty bad. And there was a lot of, Isaiah's stuff was difficult, but there was a lot of personal things that were also very difficult, right? When you're just got all the bad things in the world piled up on top of each other, it's pretty easy to start looking around and going, this is a mess. Like, I'm on my own, apparently, and you can get yourself into some pretty dark thought processes and habits.
We've got about 3 minutes.
We're trying.
We'll wrap it up. I'll wrap it up. I'll be faster. So again, just representative kind of our desert years here. And then in August of 2019, my mom passed away. She had been suffering from MS for many years.
On Steph's birthday.
Yeah, she did die on my birthday. So it was hard. You read about grief, you just don't know how it's going to impact you until it happens. And I was shocked how much physically and mentally and emotionally it impacted me. And then you throw in COVID, and you throw in, it was a hard period, but I'm going to go to the next one. So these are just a couple quotes I wanted to share. You may never know that Jesus is all you need until Jesus is all you have, is what Corrie ten Boom said. Nancy Guthrie says, to be truly blessed by God is not to emerge from the struggles of life unscathed, but to emerge from them having been pressed more deeply into God. And I think that has happened for both of us, so can I go to the next one? I feel like things really kind of turned around for us, though, about the end of 2019. Dan started working for Paul Obrist. That was the first steady paycheck we'd had in 4 years. It was amazing. Dan loved working for Paul, and I'm not just saying that, he really did. It's hard work, but he loved it. And then 2020, he got hired on at Paulson's Flooring. And again, we're like, okay, we can do this. And then, you start working in your current program. We threw up a couple pictures from that time when Dan was working for Paul.
Yeah,
He came
it's
home
kinda-
cold and wet, but it was good. It was a good
represents
job.
what I was doing, jumping in a ditch and just digging some holes. And for me personally, that I think is what I needed. Part of my personal journey was always God, I think, trying to again kick me out the door. What are you willing to do what you need to do in order to take care of your family? And if that means standing in a muddy ditch, at this time, that was kind of where I finally was like, if that's what it takes, that's what I'm going to do.
That was a sewer manhole, so.
It is technically a sewer.
It is.
This is a current pictures. It's just one we enjoy. And then we just want to share a couple quick takeaways since we know we're out of time. One is just God is faithful. As we were talking about our story, we're like, this is not about us. This is about how faithful God is. But you, O Lord, are God, merciful and gracious, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness. And that's his character. That's who he is. And then again, we need the body of Christ. What an important message for this time. We've seen so many people fall away from church, just of our own age group, and it's heartbreaking because you need the body. Let us not neglect our meeting together as some people do, but encourage one another, especially now that the day of his return is drawing near. Hebrews 10:25. Thanks for letting us share.
Thank you, Dan and Stephanie. One of my mom's favorite songs is Great Is Thy Faithfulness, and you guys have definitely seen that through some good times and some hard times. So let's sing that together.